Roll the window down now. License, registration, don't argue.
Officer, my children are in the car. What did I do?
I asked for documents, not excuses. You failed the signal.
I didn't fail the signal. Please explain the stop.
Step out of the vehicle or I'll make that decision for you.
The afternoon had been ordinary in the way working parents come to treasure. Angela Morris had just finished a long shift at the hospital, the kind of shift that leaves your feet aching and your mind still half focused on patients you've handed off to the next team. She changed out of her scrubs, straightened her jacket, and drove toward the elementary school she visited almost every weekday, the familiar route etched into muscle memory. This was not a hurried drive, not a reckless one. It was the careful, measured pace of a mother thinking about homework, dinner, and whether there was enough time to squeeze in a quiet evening before bedtime. Angela was 38 years old, a registered nurse at a regional hospital that served 3 counties. For over a decade, she had been the calm presence in emergency rooms and recovery wards, trusted by doctors, leaned on by families, and respected by co-workers who knew she never cut corners. She had no criminal record, no unpaid tickets, no history of trouble. Her life was built around responsibility, 12-hour shifts, early mornings, and the constant balancing act of raising 2 children on her own. Her gray Toyota Highlander rolled smoothly through the suburban arterial road, passing grocery stores, cafes, and the low brick buildings of medical offices and tutoring centers. School zone signs dotted the roadside, and the traffic flowed slowly, predictably. In the back seat, her children talked softly, one recounting a spelling test, the other clutching a backpack nearly as big as their torso. Angela listened with half a smile, responding instinctively, her eyes on the road, her thoughts already shifting toward dinner plans and the laundry waiting at home. Nothing about the scene suggested conflict. The vehicle was clean, legally registered, recently serviced. The insurance card was tucked neatly in the glove compartment, exactly where it had always been. Angela's phone sat face down in the center console, untouched. The radio played low, an old R&B station she favored because it kept the drive calm and familiar. This was not a woman trying to draw attention. This was a mother moving through the quiet logistics of everyday life. As she slowed near an intersection, sunlight slanted across the windshield, illuminating the dashboard and briefly catching the gold chain at her neck. She checked her mirrors, signaled, and merged with the traffic heading toward home. Behind her, cars followed at a respectful distance. Ahead, the road opened into a long, straight stretch bordered by trees and storefronts. Then, without warning, flashing red and blue lights filled the rearview mirror. At first, Angela assumed the officer was responding to something urgent, racing past on the opposite side of the road. She glanced again, heart ticking up just slightly, and realized the lights were staying with her. A siren chirped once. Her stomach tightened. She signaled calmly and pulled to the shoulder, just past a row of small businesses, her movements deliberate and careful. She took a slow breath, instinctively steadying herself. Not for her own sake, but for the children watching her from the back seat. "It's okay," she said quietly, her voice controlled. "Just stay buckled." The Highlander came to a full stop. The engine idled. The world outside felt suddenly louder, sharper. Traffic continued to pass, drivers glancing over as they went. Angela rested both hands visibly on the steering wheel, the way she had been taught years ago, her posture composed. She had nothing to hide, nothing to explain. This was a routine stop, she told herself. Just another brief interruption in an otherwise ordinary day. She had no way of knowing that, in the next few minutes, that ordinary afternoon would fracture into something far heavier, an encounter that would follow her long after the lights were turned off, one that would test her composure, her dignity, and her faith in a system she had always believed was meant to protect families like hers. The officer did not approach with the measured pace Angela had expected. His footsteps were quick, deliberate, the gravel beneath his boots crunching sharply as he came up alongside the driver's window. Even before he spoke, his presence filled the space, close enough that Angela could see the tension in his jaw and the rigid set of his shoulders reflected faintly in the glass. "License and registration," Officer Brooks said, his voice clipped, impatient. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a command delivered as though the situation were already decided. Angela turned her head slightly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Of course," she replied evenly. "Before I reach for anything, May I ask why I'm being stopped? Brooks exhaled through his nose, a sound that carried irritation more than breath. You were driving suspiciously, he said. The word hung in the air, vague and heavy. Suspicious. Angela processed it in the same way she processed incomplete information at work, by asking for clarity. I'm not sure what you mean, she said. I was driving with traffic. Did I miss a signal or a speed change? Brooks leaned closer, his shadow cutting across the door. Don't play games with me, he snapped. Just do what I asked. In the back seat, one of the children shifted, the faint rustle of a backpack audible in the sudden quiet. Angela felt their attention sharpen, felt their eyes on her shoulders, on the officer's silhouette at the window. She reached slowly into the glove compartment, retrieving her registration, then her wallet. Every movement was deliberate, visible, cautious. As she handed over the documents, she tried again, her voice steady but firmer now. Officer, I'd still like to know the reason for the stop. Brooks glanced at the paperwork without really looking at it, his fingers tightening around the edges. I told you already, he said. Suspicious driving in this area. This is a school corridor, Angela replied. I drive this route every day. If there's a specific issue, I'd appreciate you explaining it. The officer straightened slightly, his posture stiffening rather than easing. You don't get to dictate how this goes, he said. You get stopped. You answer questions. Angela felt the imbalance settle in. The familiar, unsettling shift where a routine interaction tilts into something else entirely. She kept her tone measured, professional, the same tone she used with anxious families in hospital rooms. I'm answering, she said. I'm just asking for clarification. Brooks turned his head toward the street briefly, then back to her, as if checking who might be watching. Step out of the vehicle, he ordered. Angela blinked, surprised. Is there a reason you need me to step out? She asked. My children are in the back seat. That's not my concern, Brooks replied. Step out of the vehicle. Traffic continued to flow past them. The body cam on the second officer captured it all. The lack of any traffic violation, the unbroken stream of cars moving at the same pace Angela had been traveling. No sudden swerves. No erratic braking. No missed signals. Just a stopped car and an officer escalating without cause. Angela's heart rate climbed, but she kept her breathing slow. Officer, she said, I'm happy to cooperate, but I'd like your badge number and the specific reason for. Enough, Brooks cut in sharply. You're getting argumentative. I'm asking questions, Angela replied quietly. That's not the same thing. Brooks's jaw tightened. Out of the car. Now. For a moment, Angela hesitated, not out of defiance, but calculation. She was weighing her children's fear against the risk of escalation, the instinct to protect them battling the knowledge that compliance, even when unjust, was often the safest path. Slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said. I'm going to unbuckle my seatbelt. As she did, the officer took a step back, his hand hovering near his belt, his eyes never leaving her. The dashcam recorded the entire exchange, the absence of any lawful justification glaring in its quiet objectivity. What Brooks called suspicious was not supported by a single observable fact. But the tone, the assumptions, the refusal to explain, those told a different story, one Angela understood all too well. She stepped out of the vehicle, closing the door carefully behind her. The children's faces pressed briefly against the window before she straightened, standing on the shoulder of the road, hands visible, posture calm. Inside the car, fear lingered. Outside, authority loomed. And in that narrow strip of asphalt between routine and rupture, it became unmistakably clear that this stop had never been about driving at all. Angela was sitting inside the vehicle with her shoulders squared and her hands resting calmly at her sides, aware of every movement she made and how it might be interpreted. She did not raise her voice. She did not protest physically. Every instinct told her that the most important thing in that moment was not winning an argument, but keeping the situation from spiraling in front of her children. She could feel their fear even without turning around. It pressed against her back like a weight. Please, she said evenly, my kids are in the car. If there's something you need, I'm cooperating. I just want to understand what's happening. Officer Brooks did not respond to the request itself. Instead, he stepped closer, narrowing the space between them. Hands behind your back, he said. Angela's breath caught for a fraction of a second. Am I being detained? She asked, careful to keep her voice steady. Or am I free to leave? Brooks spoke over her, louder now. I said, hands behind your back. From the passenger seat, a small voice broke through the tension. Mom? One of the children said, trembling. Why are you getting out? Angela closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, grounding herself. She turned her head just enough to be heard without turning her body. I'm okay, she said softly. Just stay buckled. Mommy's right here. The body cam caught it all, the way her tone shifted instantly for her children, gentler, reassuring, even as the officer's posture remained rigid and unyielding. She placed her hands behind her back, fingers interlaced, not because she believed she had done anything wrong, but because she understood the fragile balance of the moment. Officer, she said again, I'm complying. I'd still like to know the legal basis for this. Brooks shook his head as if dismissing an inconvenience. You keep talking, he said. That's not helping you. I'm asking lawful questions, Angela replied. I have the right to. No, Brooks interrupted sharply. You have the right to follow instructions. Her children were crying now, their voices muffled by the glass, but unmistakable. One sobbed openly, calling her name again and again. Angela's jaw tightened, but she did not turn toward the car. She knew that sudden movements could be misread. Instead, she stood still, her eyes forward, her voice calm but resolute. Please, she said, they're scared. Can you at least tell them what's going on? Brooks did not look toward the car. He adjusted his stance and spoke into his radio briefly. His tone clipped, then turned back to Angela as if the children did not exist. You're being detained for investigation, he said. For what investigation? Angela asked. There's been no violation. I asked you to explain. He cut her off mid-sentence. I don't need to explain myself to you. The body cam recorded the pattern clearly. Angela began to speak, and Brooks interrupted. She asked for clarity. He raised his voice. She referenced her rights. He reframed her calm questions as resistance. The emotional reality unfolding just a few feet away. Two frightened children, watching their mother treated like a threat, did nothing to alter his approach. Angela swallowed, forcing her breathing to remain slow. Years in the hospital had taught her how quickly panic could escalate, how fear could cloud judgment. She would not let that happen here. Officer, she said carefully, I'm a nurse. I work at the regional hospital. I was picking up my children from school. If there's an issue with my driving, I'm willing to address it, but this doesn't feel appropriate. Brooks let out a short, humorless laugh. Everyone's got a story, he said. That doesn't change what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? Angela asked. Again, he spoke over her. Face forward. Don't turn around. Angela obeyed, even as frustration and disbelief churned beneath the surface. She had done everything asked of her. She had spoken respectfully. She had acknowledged his authority without surrendering her dignity. And still, the situation tightened rather than eased. Behind her, the children cried louder now, the sound carrying over the noise of passing traffic. A driver slowed, glanced over, then continued on. Life moved forward around them, indifferent to the quiet trauma unfolding on the roadside. Angela's voice softened once more as she addressed the air between her and the car. It's okay, she said, forcing reassurance into every word. Just breathe. Mommy's okay. The officer did not pause. He did not acknowledge the fear he was causing. He continued issuing commands, interrupting her attempts to speak, asserting control through volume and proximity. The body cam bore silent witness to the contrast. A mother restraining her fear to protect her children, and an officer who refused to see anything beyond his own authority. In that moment, Angela understood something with painful clarity. Her calm was not being mistaken for cooperation, it was being tested. And no matter how carefully she moved, no matter how respectfully she spoke, the burden of de-escalation had been placed entirely on her shoulders, even as the power to escalate rested solely in his hands. The shift from intimidation to outright threat happened quickly, almost imperceptibly at first. Officer Brooks took a step closer, his voice rising just enough to cut through the ambient noise of traffic. You keep asking questions, he said, and that's noncompliance. Angela turned her head slightly, careful to keep her hands visible. I'm complying, she said. I've followed every instruction you've given me. That's not how I see it, Brooks replied. You don't get to debate with me on the side of the road. The words landed heavily. Noncompliance. Angela knew what that word could justify in an officer's report. She also knew how quickly it could escalate from a label to an arrest. "Officer," she said evenly, "my children are still in the car. If you're going to detain me, I need to make sure they're safe." Brooks ignored the request. "Step away from the vehicle," he ordered again. "Now." Angela hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes flicking instinctively toward the back seat. The children were crying openly now, their voices thin and frightened. "Please," she said, her composure stretched but unbroken. "They're scared. I haven't done anything wrong." Brooks's tone hardened. "This is your last warning. Step away or you will be arrested." The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Angela took a slow step forward, away from the car, every muscle tense. The body cam captured the distance growing between her and her children, the way she kept turning her head just enough to reassure them without provoking the officer. Moments later, a second patrol car pulled up behind Brooks's vehicle. Another officer stepped out, surveying the scene. Angela felt a brief flicker of hope. Not relief, but the possibility that a fresh set of eyes might bring reason back into the encounter. "Is there a problem here?" the backup officer asked. Brooks answered immediately, his voice confident, rehearsed. "Drivers being uncooperative," he said, refusing to follow instructions. Angela opened her mouth to speak, but Brooks cut her off. "Ma'am, I told you not to talk." The backup officer glanced between them, then toward the children in the car. For a moment, there was hesitation. Then, without asking further questions, he nodded and stepped back, deferring to Brooks's authority. The dynamic was clear. Whatever concerns might exist would not be raised here, not on the roadside, not in front of a superior voice. The cameras continued recording, indifferent to rank or narrative. They captured Angela's steady compliance, her repeated attempts to clarify, the absence of any resistance. They captured Brooks's escalating language, his threats, his refusal to explain the basis of the stop. They captured the children's sobs, growing louder as the situation dragged on. Later, Brooks would write in his report that Angela had been argumentative and initially refused commands. He would claim she had delayed exiting the vehicle and questioned his authority in a way he perceived as hostile. But the dashcam and bodycam told a different story, one of measured responses, of compliance framed falsely as defiance. As the footage was later reviewed, frame by frame, the contradictions became impossible to ignore. Angela had asked questions, yes, but calmly, lawfully. She had stepped away from the vehicle when ordered. She had never raised her voice. The children's presence, far from influencing Brooks to de-escalate, seemed to have no effect at all. What the cameras did not capture in that moment, but what would soon come to light, was that this was not the first time Officer Brooks's judgment had been questioned. Internal records revealed a quiet trail of complaints. Drivers stopped without clear cause, explanations that shifted after the fact, accusations of noncompliance that dissolved under video review. Each complaint, taken alone, had been dismissed as inconclusive. Together, they formed a pattern of escalation, a pattern of authority asserted without accountability, a pattern that placed the burden of calm on those with the least power, while granting the greatest discretion to those already armed with it. Standing on the roadside, separated from her children by a few yards and a growing sense of injustice, Angela did not yet know any of this. She only knew that what should have been a routine stop had turned into something far more dangerous, not because of her actions, but because of the unchecked power now bearing down on her. And as the officers conferred quietly near their vehicles, the cameras kept recording, preserving a truth that would soon travel far beyond that stretch of road, into courtrooms, newsrooms, and the public conscience. In the days that followed, the shock of the roadside encounter gave way to a quieter, heavier realization for Angela Morris. What had happened was not just upsetting, it was wrong. Not morally ambiguous, not a misunderstanding, but a clear misuse of authority that had unfolded in front of her children. Once the immediate fear subsided and her children returned to their routines, the questions began to press in. What would have happened if she had spoken differently? If she had moved too quickly? If there had been no cameras? Angela contacted an attorney recommended by a colleague at the hospital, a civil rights lawyer with years of experience handling police misconduct cases. During their first meeting, she watched the footage again, this time not as a frightened participant, but as an observer. The Bodycam audio captured everything: the raised voice, the interruptions, the vague accusations, the threats framed as procedure. It also captured something far more damning: the sound of children crying while an officer continued to escalate. The attorney was silent as the footage played. When it ended, she looked up and said simply, "This should never have happened." With Angela's consent, the footage was prepared for release. Not edited for drama, not enhanced, just presented as it was. Within hours of being shared with a local investigative reporter, the story began to spread. Headlines did not focus on legal jargon or departmental statements. They focused on the children, on the image of a mother standing on the roadside while her kids cried in the back seat, on the question many viewers asked instinctively: if this could happen to her, who was safe? Local news stations aired the footage repeatedly, often freezing frames that showed Angela's calm posture contrasted with the officer's aggressive stance. Commentators pointed out the lack of any visible traffic violation. Former law enforcement officials weighed in, noting how quickly the stop escalated and how little justification appeared on camera. The presence of children transformed public reaction from concern to outrage. Civil rights organizations took notice almost immediately. Advocacy groups shared the footage across social media platforms, framing it as a clear example of racial profiling and excessive force through intimidation. Statements poured in from national organizations emphasizing the psychological harm caused when children witnessed their parents being treated as criminals without cause. Angela's story became part of a broader conversation about policing, race, and the long-term impact of these encounters on families. As public attention grew, Angela's attorney filed a federal lawsuit on her behalf. The complaint alleged violations of the Fourth Amendment, citing unlawful detention without reasonable suspicion, and the 14th Amendment, asserting unequal treatment under the law based on race. The lawsuit named the officer, his supervisors, and the city, arguing that the conduct was not only unconstitutional, but enabled by a failure to discipline repeated misconduct. Court filings laid out the evidence with precision. Timestamps showed when commands were issued and ignored questions cut short. Audio transcripts highlighted how Angela's calm inquiries were labeled as defiance. Dashcam footage contradicted the officer's written report point by point. What had been described as non-compliance appeared, on video, as restraint. What was labeled suspicious behavior appeared indistinguishable from any other parent driving through a school corridor. National media outlets soon picked up the story. Angela was invited to speak, though she chose her appearances carefully. When she did speak, her words were measured, focused less on anger and more on accountability. She spoke about her children, about the fear in their voices, about how difficult it was to explain why an officer treated their mother that way. Her restraint resonated deeply, especially with parents who recognized the quiet terror of that moment. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted on city officials. Legal analysts began speculating publicly about the strength of the case. Former prosecutors noted that juries respond strongly to clear video evidence, particularly when children are involved. Internal emails later revealed concern within the city's legal department about the likelihood of losing at trial and the broader implications for the department's practices. What had started as a single traffic stop now carried national weight. The footage had done what reports and statistics often could not. It showed, unmistakably, how power could be misused in plain sight. And as the lawsuit moved forward, it became clear that this case would not be quietly dismissed or settled without consequence. Angela Morris had not sought attention. She had sought safety, dignity, and answers. What followed was something larger, a legal reckoning driven not by outrage alone, but by evidence, persistence, and a mother's refusal to let what happened to her children be written off as routine. As the case moved closer to trial, the tone inside the city's legal offices shifted from confidence to calculation. Motions were filed, depositions taken, experts retained, but none of it changed the central problem facing the defense. The footage was unyielding. Every second of video, every overlapping command, every frightened voice from the back seat remained exactly as the public had seen it. There was no alternate interpretation that softened its impact, no procedural explanation that made it acceptable. During depositions, the officer's account began to unravel. Under oath, he struggled to reconcile his written report with what appeared on the body cam. He pointed to officer safety, then to training, then to instinct, but each justification collapsed under cross-examination. When asked to explain why Angela Morris was ordered out of the vehicle despite full compliance and 2 children present, his answers became circular. When asked why no citation was issued, no warning given, no violation documented, the room fell quiet. City officials understood the risk. A jury would not only see a violation of policy, they would see a violation of trust. Legal advisors warned that a verdict could exceed 7 figures and invite federal oversight. More damaging still was the precedent. A loss would signal to every resident watching that the department's internal safeguards had failed. In a closed session, the city council voted to authorize settlement negotiations. The agreement was announced on a Thursday morning. The city would pay Angela Morris $1.2 million to resolve the federal civil rights lawsuit. There would be no admission of wrongdoing in the language of the settlement, but the actions that followed spoke louder than the carefully chosen words. Within hours of the announcement, the department confirmed that the officer involved had been removed from patrol duties and placed on indefinite administrative leave pending further disciplinary action. Weeks later, the decision became permanent. The officer was formally disciplined and reassigned away from any public-facing enforcement role. His record, once quietly padded with complaints, now reflected sustained findings of misconduct. For Angela, it was not about seeing someone punished. It was about knowing that the same authority would not be placed, unchecked, in front of another family. The settlement triggered mandatory reforms. The department agreed to revise its traffic stop protocols, requiring clearer articulation of reasonable suspicion before escalation. Bodycam review policies were strengthened, ensuring that footage involving minors would receive expedited oversight. De-escalation training, once optional, became compulsory for all patrol officers, with specific modules addressing interactions involving parents and children. An independent auditor was appointed to review prior complaints against the officer and evaluate how they had been handled. Community leaders were invited into the process, not as spectators, but as participants. Public forums were scheduled, uncomfortable but necessary conversations held. For the first time in years, residents felt their concerns were not being absorbed into silence. When Angela stood beside her attorney at the press conference, she did not celebrate. She spoke quietly, deliberately. She said the settlement would help secure her children's future, but money was not justice on its own. Justice, she said, was knowing that policies had changed, that training would improve, and that another mother might drive home without fear because this case forced accountability. The city called it a resolution. The public called it a reckoning. For many watching, the outcome affirmed something long doubted, that evidence still mattered, that restraint could prevail over intimidation, and that even a routine traffic stop, when exposed to the light, could become a turning point. The verdict was not just a figure written into a settlement agreement. It was a line drawn, publicly, between authority and abuse, and a reminder that the law, when pressed, could still serve those it was meant to protect. In the weeks that followed, Angela Morris found herself stepping into a role she never sought. Invitations arrived from community groups, nursing associations, parent forums, and faith organizations. Each time she stood at a podium or sat beneath fluorescent lights in a school gym, she began the same way, not with anger, but with honesty. She spoke as a mother first, a mother who had done everything right, a mother who still watched her children flinch when a patrol car passed too closely. She described the silence in the back seat after the stop ended, how her youngest asked, in a small voice, if she was going to jail, how her older child stopped asking questions altogether. Angela explained that children may not know the language of constitutional rights, but they understand fear immediately, and once it takes root, it lingers. Nightmares, sudden anxiety, a new wariness of authority. These were not abstract harms. They were injuries carried home. Angela made one point repeatedly, because it mattered. Education did not shield her. Her uniform did not protect her. Her calm tone and professional demeanor did not prevent suspicion from attaching itself the moment she was seen behind the wheel. Respectability, she said, is not armor. Compliance is not immunity. Profiling does not pause for credentials. As her words spread, other mothers began to speak. Nurses, teachers, business owners, women who had raised their children to trust the system. only to find themselves explaining why that trust had been shaken. Angela did not present herself as a symbol, but others recognized one in her story. She became a mirror reflecting a truth many had lived quietly. The conversation widened beyond one stop, one officer, one settlement. It turned toward training rooms and policy manuals, toward who is held accountable and who is protected. Angela called for reforms not as punishment, but as prevention, clear standards, independent oversight, a culture where authority is measured by restraint, not volume. Near the end of one address, she paused before speaking again. She said this case was never about money. It was about making sure her children, and someone else's, could grow up without associating flashing lights with fear. She reminded the room that justice is not proven by settlements alone, but by what changes after the cameras are gone. Her message was simple, and it endured. A society is judged not by how it treats the powerful, but by how it protects the vulnerable. And accountability, when demanded calmly and consistently, is not confrontation, it is responsibility.